Welcome to By Design, a journey to discovering how heritage, tradition, and culture influence the way people problem solve through the process of genuinely listening and learning from each other's stories. The stories and opinions expressed on By Design represent the individual experiences of no one else but my guests and I. They are not a generalization of our culture and do not represent the opinions of others. On this episode, I'll be talking with Enon Avital about his culture growing up in Netanya, Israel, and how it's changed since he moved to New Jersey. He will be talking about what's culturally acceptable in Netanya and how it's based on the strength of your faith. Enon will also talk to us about his struggles growing up in a land of continuous conflict and how he's found peace and acceptance since he's moved back to the US. Today, Enon is a well-respected UI/UX designer for Adorama New York. He's known best for his dimensional food typography and Hebrew lettering work, where he crafts beautiful Hebrew type using everyday materials. Enon Avital and I are breaking the physical wall, dividing our people in Jerusalem, and coming together as humans first to spread love, peace, and acceptance. Enon embodies love in every aspect of his life. He is a religious man, a father of three, and a loving husband. Enon, welcome to By Design.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. I am so excited to have you. Thank you for coming. Enon, can you start by introducing yourself to everyone?
You gave me a pretty nice intro, so I don't know how I can top that, but my name is Enon Avital. I am professionally a UX designer, and on the side, I also do a lot of Hebrew typography, and I make notebooks. I'm a father. And I think that's everything in the most nuttiest nutshell I can give you.
No, that's great. That's perfect. Can you start by telling us a little bit about where you grew up and how you grew up and how you ended up in the U.S.?
Sure. I grew up in Netanya, Israel, not too far from where your family is.
Yeah.
And I grew up in an extremely religious household and community. One of 11 kids, 10 siblings, actually. I'm the third in line. And my family is still very religious. And that meant for me getting a strictly religious education, which is mostly learning Bible, learning that sort of a thing, inside a all-boys school, of course, no mixed classrooms. And the community itself where I lived and hanged out and was a part of was also overall very religious Jews. And for all of us, that mostly meant that we're very insular because in order to keep the faith, in order to keep the religious vibe going on, in order to not get outside influence, which is what usually leads to people leaving the community.
Did you get disconnected?
I got disconnected.
It's okay. No, that's fine.
Everybody can hear me still?
Yeah, you're perfect.
Excellent. I will continue.
Yeah.
So by nature, wanting to not have any outside influence would mean for the community to distance themselves from anybody who's not like them. And that includes people who are Jewish but not the same kind of religious level as they are, and people from other religions, and so on and so forth. So I grew up pretty much talking only to Jewish boys who were of the same faith level as me. And that's where I was at.
Wow, that's interesting. So I really got to know you a little bit over the span of the last few weeks. And we've met in Creative South. And the way we met was very interesting because I had done an interview at the Creative South podcast. And we were on the launch, the launch party for Creative South. And I remember we were waiting to get some food, and it was the only kind of like the vegetarian food. So it didn't have like pork or anything like that. So we were in line. I know, right? Yeah. We were in line trying to get some food, and we got talking. And I have a habit of trying to introduce myself with like, hi, my name is Hiba, because I feel like names are so important. I really wanted to get to know your name. And I was like, hi, my name is Hiba. And you were like, hi, Hiba. Yeah, I'm from Israel. We're in the same place, and I was like, I loved, you're saying you loved the interview. And I was so humbled by your reaction. And it's very like I don't really get to meet people from the other side of the Jerusalem wall. I don't really get to meet and talk to people. So for me, I just wanted to ask you so many questions. So I'm so thankful that you're here. And I wanted to ask you, you were saying that you guys kind of get isolated based on the religion. So that means that there are like other Israelis who are a little bit more open-minded and who are not as religious and probably are Americanized kind of in Israel.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
it goes all ways. I wouldn't say that I was part of the most insular communities, because there are ones that are even more closed off than the way I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
But there are certainly plenty more. In fact, probably a larger percentage of Jews living in Israel and around the world are less strict in terms of how they interact with people around themselves, and who they talk to, and who they let into their circles.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to be in a relatively small percentage, not tiny, but significant enough community that was like that. But there are plenty of people who are non-religious also, people who are very inclusive, and I was just never exposed to that at all.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit about the different, you called restrictions levels, and where your family lives in, like which on the spectrum, where do you guys sit? And talk a little bit more about the differences, and maybe we can move on from there on how you've discovered the modern Orthodox Judaism.
Okay, I'll try to keep this short, because the whole concept of kind of labeling communities doesn't feel right to me. But just for clarification, I'll go through as minimal of a detail as possible. Let's start from the most strict. It's general. Hasidic Jews are very, very strict. They are kind of like how I grew up, but to some extent they talk even less to outsiders, and they mostly speak Yiddish. They don't even speak the language of the land that they live in, whether it be Hebrew in Israel or English in America and so on. They speak that only as necessary, but they'll focus on even their own language. Wow. Then there is the kind of community where I grew up, which is ultra Orthodox, I guess you might call it. After that, on a slightly less restrictive level, is modern Orthodox, where people are more free, they're more open, they understand pop culture, general subjects. They have TV sometimes in their house. They'll read books and philosophy, and some schools, modern Orthodox, will have mixed classrooms. And then there are people who are on some other levels everywhere in between, and there are also many people who are non-religious at all, but are affiliated in some ways. For example, doing holidays with the family and things like that. They identify as Jewish, but not religious in a strict sense.
That's awesome. I really didn't know any of that, and I find it very fascinating. It's not about like being labeled or anything, but I do believe that every religion has a spectrum of how religious you are. But it's interesting to know that there's a whole different language other than Hebrew that people speak. I'm not familiar with the language you mentioned. Yeah, exactly. So now I just want to go and research it and just learn a little bit more about it. But I remember you were telling me about, going to school, being like your teenage years, you have to eventually end up going to like a boarding school.
Yeah.
How was that
so
experience?
in the circles that I grew up, generally speaking, once you finish elementary school, you go into high school that's called yeshiva. And most kids will end up going to a boarding school yeshiva. You basically are with a bunch of boys your age, just learning Bible. At that point, generally, general studies are dropped, and you only focus on religious studies. And from then on, for the rest of one's life. And boarding school might even mean, boarding school a few blocks away from your house. Doesn't have to be very far away, but most kids in that age go to boarding school, and they're away from the house at the age of 14, however old you are when you finish elementary school.
Wow. So you lived at the school? You lived at the school. Yeah. I mean, that's what boarding school means, but like right. The fact that, you're only a few miles away from your house and you're still living at the school, that's interesting.
Well, I actually wasn't. I grew up in Netanya, but my first boarding school straight out of elementary school was in Jerusalem.
Oh, okay. Yes, that's a few hours away, right?
Yeah. And I would go there myself. At that point, I would travel to the school myself. I would go around. I would be pretty much, on my own, which turned out to not be the greatest thing. I mean, for me and my, long term in life was good, but as far as my parents saw it at the time, they didn't think it was too great because I wasn't behaving well. I was doing whatever I wanted, and I got kicked out of that first one, and then they sent me to another one, and I got kicked out of that. And there were several yeshivas that I was sent to that I kind of got kicked out of, and went to other ones, and every subsequent yeshiva was less and less less about learning and more about just containing the kids.
Wow.
And at the end, the last one that I was in was a place where it was basically a holding pen for us to not get in trouble, which we did anyways, of course, naturally. But I was not learning anymore. I was already 16 and kind of just stuck, not doing anything in my life. And at that point, mind you, I still didn't know much about other people other than my community. I wasn't interacting with other people. I watched some movies in secret, but I was not exposed to anything, and I honestly did not have a mind of my own. I didn't know how to think.
I find it very interesting because I would have never thought in a million years that that was the lifestyle that somebody could be living on, in Israel. The only time I was able to go to Israel is if I was going to visit the mosque in Al-Quds, Jerusalem. So I would see, because that is a holy place, and it fosters three religions. You get to see, but you don't really interact. And I think what happens is everybody just, walks in their own lane and doesn't really try to interact, which is so sad. But I wanted to.
It makes for very pretty pictures.
Huh? I'm sorry.
It makes for some very pretty pictures.
I mean, yes, definitely. But yeah, you're absolutely right. But I think everybody kind of has this kind of like wall built up, like not real, like physical wall, but like an emotional and visual wall. And, everyone has a goal and they're going towards it. And it's very fascinating for me to kind of learn your story. And I know not everybody's is going to have the same story as you, but that was your experience. And that was interesting. It's not something that I kind of envisioned. You know what I mean? So
most people, I would say, they did not grow up that way. I was just part of a particular community that happened to be like that. But eventually when I grew up, I met a lot more people, and I realized that it's pretty exclusive, and it's not that, widespread, I guess.
I think that's what happens once you grow up and you venture out into the world. I mean, eventually, what was the path that you would have taken if you would have succeeded in the boarding schools? Explain a little bit about that.
Well, it wouldn't turn out at all the same way. And what you just said a second ago, eventually people, do find out about these things. That wouldn't be true. I could have very likely just been stuck in my own community, gotten married there, had kids that are very much the same way, going to the same kind of schools. And that would have been that, just continuing to be in the same circles. That's totally plausible. And that's probably what would have happened. But
you had not a better, I'm just going to rephrase. You had a different alternative that led to a better life for you when your parents decided to take you out of the school that you ended up in and send you to live with your uncle in the U.S., correct?
Yes. My mom's siblings live in New Jersey, and they saw what was going on with me, and they said, we've got to save that kid. So I had the opportunity of a lifetime, literally, where they took me out. They brought me to America, and I came to live by my one uncle in New Jersey, who took me in, and a few weeks later brought me to a school. I did an interview there. They said, this kid's got to learn English and math because he's got none of that. And I studied English and math for a few months over the summer, and I started going to school and becoming part of, American society in, mind you, a modern Orthodox household. That's the kind of religious level that his household was in. Yeah.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about your religious journey when you first came here and came to the U.S. and how did you experience culture shock, and did that lead you through a religious experience or journey?
Yeah, so I'm going to also partially answer a question from Dunya here. She asked if I knew zero English. I knew a tad bit, just barely, and I had to learn like a child from, kids' books with pictures, showing, here is a courtroom and this is what this, and this is in the courtroom. Here's what a house is and here's what's this in the garden, things like that. And I also watched a lot of Frasier, which helped me a ton. So I didn't know much English, and I learned English, but more importantly, I learned to become a human. And how that started happening was because at first I completely abandoned religion. I was fed up with it. I was taught in a way that just it didn't sit well with me. So I just stopped. I couldn't do anything. And my uncle was the nicest and the smartest guy, because he said to everybody around me in my family, who were all, Jewish and religious to a certain extent, he said to them, let him be. Don't force anything on him. He needs to learn religion through love, not through restriction.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
It was amazing. And I didn't find this out until recently, when my grandfather, who also lived with my uncle at the time, he told me this, and I was almost crying. I was amazed, because the fact that he brought me in is amazing in the first place. He literally took me as a son, and he also understood what I truly needed. And he guided me without actually guiding me to learn about religion in a way that I was not at all familiar with. And then he guided me to learn about people in a way that I wasn't familiar with. And I learned about humans and humanity and life. And I know that this sounds kind of crazy and weird and global and broad, but having grown up with none of that, and basically very little knowledge of the outside world, outside religion and Bible, it was a lot. And that's truly what happened. I don't know. It kind of like sounds a little bit like, general and open-ended, but I learned things.
No, that's amazing, because, the saying, if you love something, let it go. And, if it comes back, then you'll know. So that was awesome that he kind of gave you the freedom to explore this new environment, and realize that, your religion or your culture is kind of your home, and realize it on your own, because it kind of made you look at the world and kind of, make your own contrasts and similarities, let's just say, and it kind of brought you back home in a sense, right?
Exactly.
So what cultural traditions did you take with you from Netanya to New Jersey?
I didn't. I abandoned everything, and I was living in my uncle's house, and he was religious, so I respected everything that he was doing, including, Shabbat, so it's our Sabbath, where you have certain ways of handling yourself. I respected all those things, and I joined him in all his festivities and things like that. So I, in a way, partook in all the customs that my uncle had at the time, and I was just becoming part of that. That was really it.
Yeah. Did you experience culture shock?
I don't remember.
Oh my God.
Honestly.
Yeah. So how long have you been here? Yeah. How long have you been in the U.S.?
I came in April 2001. So
wow.
A few years now.
Yeah, that's a lifetime. No, I definitely experienced culture shock, because there's a lot of, we see a lot of skin in the U.S. I'm not used to that. So, I'm used to, like, now going back to Jordan, I experience culture shock, because they're very Americanized now, because it's kind of like a potluck, a melting pot of a lot of cultures now, but when I grew up in Jordan, it wasn't as, let's just say, forward or open-minded as it is now. And that was kind of the biggest culture shock for me, was the way people dressed and the way they interacted with one another. So that was my experience with that. It's interesting that it's been 10 years now, and I still think about that,
Yeah, I mean, like, these are things that I have noticed when I did go back there, but I think because it was so different when I came here, and it was a life that I was completely not expecting, I wasn't used to. I think some switch in my brain just kind of like went like that, and then I was just, becoming me. So the switch from before and after doesn't I don't have that in my mind. It doesn't resonate anymore. It's not part of who I am. So I don't know. Honestly, strange.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk about maybe the different, like a unique cultural tradition that Netanya has that's different from like surrounding cities?
I don't know about Netanya specifically, but I grew up in a Sephardic community. Sephardic Jews are people from the Middle East, actually Middle Eastern Jews, mostly Jews who have lived among Muslims for many years.
Uh-huh.
My family, my father's family, they're all from Morocco,
Oh,
which is, by the way, a beautiful example of how to live side by side.
yeah.
They have the best history of just respecting each other,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And um, so my father's family is from Casablanca, and a lot of it's not general Jewish traditions, but a lot of the tunes and the music and the vibe, the kind of cultural vibe where, an Ashkenazi Jew wouldn't come up to a friend and give him a kiss on both cheeks,
Uh-huh,
right?
uh-huh. Yeah.
But you're familiar with this. You
Yes,
go up to your friend
definitely.
and give them a kiss on the cheeks, right? So we have a lot of the music and the behavior and the community feeling that most Middle Eastern communities have,
Huh.
Muslim and otherwise. That's what I grew up with in terms
Yeah.
of feeling.
That's
So
awesome.
the music is definitely something that held me. Actually, I had a time when I came to America, it was pre easy internet, right?
Hmm.
Napster wasn't around yet.
Hmm.
And I was shut off from everything, including music. Like I had no Israeli music, no Middle Eastern music, none of the Moroccan stuff that I love, no, Andalusian orchestra things. And it took me many years to finally find a way to get some of that back.
Hmm.
And because it's been so long, when I first started listening to it, I was like in heaven
Yeah.
because it was just withheld from me. So that's one thing that I truly missed. And once it came back, now I kind of listen to it almost exclusively sometimes
Oh, I
because
can
uh,
completely relate to the music because it affects you emotionally, and it brings back a lot of memories, which is great. We have a question in the chat room by Anna, and she's asking, are Sephardis still called the same today?
yeah, I mean, generally, if you say Sephardi Jew, it's referring to Middle Eastern Jews from everywhere, except for Yemen. That's the one place where they're specifically called Yemenite Jews.
Uh-huh.
But everywhere else in the Middle East, Jews are referred to as Sephardic Jews.
So
And
Anna,
yes, Sephard literally
uh-huh.
means Spain. You are correct. But the customs were kind of centered in Spain and went out to the Middle East. So because of our customs that are different from, let's say, European Jews, that's what we're called Sephardi Jews.
So Anna is actually from Spain, and that's why she knows all this information.
Ooh,
Yeah.
I did not know that.
So Anna's saying, she basically was saying that they are Spanish and they were kicked out in 1492.
Right.
Um, yeah.
The Inquisition times.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about maybe you visiting Netanya. Have you gone back since you've left, or have you not?
Yeah, there was a really long time for many, many years where I didn't go back. But about 2 summers ago, I went back for the first time.
Hmm.
Um, in between then and now, I got married, I had a family, my siblings, some of them got married and had a family. But I went back, and the strangest thing about going back there was that it was as if nothing had changed. The town, the city looked the same, the people all the same.
Yeah.
Everybody was a little bit older, but it was kind of, going back at first was like, oh, okay, I get it. This is exactly how it was beforehand. I understand the vibe, and it was it was interesting to have an outsider's perspective and to appreciate not having the lack of choice to belong to wherever I wanted to belong. Because
Hmm.
I grew up and I decided I got to make my own choices now. It was
Hmm.
nice to have the freedom of just, being me around that and not being who I was back then. And that
Yeah.
was the only big difference, kind of being in, going to the synagogue and praying with everybody, but
Hmm.
not feeling like I was being watched or whatever it was because I'm just me now and I don't care about,
Yeah. Yeah.
what people might think, things like
Did you
that.
have to prepare yourself for going? Did you have to kind of like freshen up on the different traditions and cultures? And, because once you enter that space, you kind of have to respect their rules, kind of. At least with for me, for whenever I go visit my village in Palestine, I definitely try to be very careful and cautious of the way I act and talk, because you are in a space that you have to kind of like respect that space. So I'm just curious, was there any preparations that you took mentally or emotionally possibly before going?
Well, yeah, there are certain things that out of respect you don't do in a place where people behave a certain way, and this can apply to anything. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have a great example, but let's say you're going to a kind of restaurant where you have to wear a suit. You wear a suit to that restaurant, right?
Well, that's interesting.
That's a thing.
Yeah.
That is a thing.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Right. So I personally wouldn't want to go to that restaurant because I don't love wearing suits. But if I were to go there for some reason, I would wear a suit because that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
So out of respect to the environment and to the people, you kind of follow the same thing. So there are, of course, certain things like wearing certain shirts. That way I brought up the example of clothing, or, saying certain things or whatever it was. So of course I knew I had to respect that. I had that in mind, but I didn't need to prepare per se. I just, had to be mindful of how I behaved out of respect. That it was just that matter of respecting the community that's still there. That's not like me anymore.
Yeah, no, the reason I say prepare is because we kind of prepare ourselves before visiting. So for me now, I'm a mother of two boys. I make sure to let them know, like, well, they're young now, but if they were in their teenage years, make sure if you're going to talk to a girl that, she's with her siblings. If you have talk to her brother, not to the girl, you know what I mean? Just little things like that. Don't sit in groups alone, be surrounded by, adults. Don't go, for example, if it's a girl, don't go to the shop by yourself. Make sure you have a brother or a cousin or whatever, and so on and so forth. So we kind of had, that's why I said prepare. It was just,
right.
for
the young. I'm in a similar situation. My kids are also still so young that playing around with the cousins and this and that, it's not, you don't have to watch out for that yet. I'm sure that once they get older, there will be certain things that they need to be made aware of. But right now, I am religious, and my kids are growing up in a religious household, so they are aware of these things by default. They might need a reminder when we go there about certain stuff, but I haven't had to deal with that yet. They're still young.
Yeah.
So
no, that's awesome. Because no, that's great. That it's more of a religious aspect of your life, whether you're in America or in Israel. You embody both. You act the same way in both areas. For us, it's more of a cultural thing. It's definitely a religious thing if I was a little bit more religious, but the way we practice it, it's more of a cultural thing. So it's more cultural acceptable if in America for us to kind of mix and hang out and go out. It's more acceptable in Jordan to go out with all of your cousins and hang out and stay out late at night and all of that. But in our village back home, even a group of girls should not be going to Ramallah till late hours of the night. So definitely it is something that we have to kind of like, talk to our kids about. And I had to kind of practice as a young teenager visiting back, in Palestine. Exactly. So it's interesting to learn what similarities we have and how they're different as well,
Well, speaking of that, I think, especially also because I come from, Sephardi tradition, our similarities are far more numerous than our differences, I'd say. Sure, we have the obvious one, our Bible, and you have the Quran, right? So that's the main one. But except for some actual religious practices differences, we're very much the same.
Yeah, no.
In terms of how we behave and grew up and how we kind of get married. And we talked about this in private beforehand, about, different marriage practices and things like that. They're pretty much the same across both cultures.
Dunya in the chat room is like hummus. So yeah, definitely. We all love hummus.
Hummus and falafel. Oh, I can eat that all day long.
No, that's great. Do you want to talk a little bit about the cultural aspect of getting married and how you guys get married?
So traditionally, where I grew up, not where I am right now, One would get married by being set up, usually. It's very uncommon for people to just find somebody, and you get set up by the parents. You would go out to a public date, sometimes with a chaperone, sometimes with not, sometimes without. And you go on a few dates, and then you basically say yes or no. And if it's a no, you, after a meeting or two, kind of have to say no and then stop. Or if it's a yes, then you continue, and then after a few dates, you basically get engaged. There are other, communities that do it differently. For example, Hasidim will have it completely arranged by the parents, and there will be just one meeting for the kids right beforehand. There are less restrictive communities like Modern Orthodox, where sometimes it's arranged and then plenty of dates happen, and sometimes kids meet on their own even. But where I grew up, it would be an arranged marriage. And there is actually a really interesting film on Netflix. I think it's called Arranged, where it follows two girls, one Jewish girl and one Muslim girl in Brooklyn, going through the process of getting engaged and getting married. And
I love documentaries.
Basically, it's not a documentary.
No, it's a movie.
No, it's a movie.
Oh, cool.
But it's based on real, true practices, and the whole point is kind of showing how it's the same.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So it's Anna's asking what's the name of the movie. It's possibly called Arranged on Netflix.
I think so.
Okay. Well, if in the show notes, I'll make sure to research and put that in the show notes for everyone. But it's interesting the way you guys get married, because I don't like to put the arranged kind of title on it, because well, for us at least, because the way it works is obviously there's different levels. My grandma, the way she got married is, and we've talked about this before, is she met her husband on the stage when she was getting married physically in the wedding, So my grandma, that's how she got married. That's when she met her husband, and they were 20 years.
That's as arranged as it gets.
That's definitely, I mean, for me, that is arranged, She didn't get to meet him or see him. She was 16 at the time, and he was 20 years older than her. And, that was how she got married. My parents had a completely different experience where they fell in love, and, they went through the traditional route. And the way I got married, which is the typical way now in my village, is the boy would see the girl maybe at one of the weddings or the parties that we have. And then he would go and tell his mom, I'm interested in her. Can you, arrange kind of like a meeting between us, talk to her family and see if we can sit down and talk and see if we have, if we're compatible. And usually what happens is the mom goes and approaches the family. And if the girl's side of the family sees that before they even talk to their daughter, if they see if that family is a suitable family for their daughter to be a part of, then they will take the next step, which is ask the daughter, are you ready to get married? Do you want to speak with this person? He is asking for your hand in marriage. And then if she says yes, they have that meeting, the initial meeting. And usually, typically, it's one meeting, but sometimes it's a second and a third meeting. And that's when they say, yes, we would like to get engaged. And the engaged period usually leads to a wedding. But recently, it's been the time where the couple get to know each other, because there is no mixing, in my culture. You're not allowed to be talking to guys and girls. I mean, obviously, we're human, we do it, but it's not acceptable, to be forward about it. So
I'm familiar with the restriction and with the critique.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yes.
And then after that period, they get married, and usually the typical time period between the engagement, so and the wedding, it's like a year, but obviously that's the average. But it's interesting to see that you guys do the same thing. For us, when they get engaged, when we sign the wedding contracts, like the marriage contract, and then we can go out on dates or whatever without a chaperone. But before then, you have to go out with a chaperone. So that's interesting that we have that in common, Mm-hmm. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit maybe about your experience with getting married?
Well, mine was relatively unusual because, I am religious right now. But before I got married, when I met my wife, I knew I always wanted to have a religious household because I like the way that certain things, when taught, the loving way,
Uh-huh.
I like how those certain things create a religious household with a nice environment. I just like the environment, and I always knew I wanted that for my family and for my kids. So when I met my wife, I was still not practicing,
Mm.
but I was ready to start doing it. And we met on our own at a friend's house over a weekend. Almost, well, our wedding date is coming up in a few days, so it's almost our 10th anniversary. But we met in the summer 10 and a half years ago. And when we met, we talked a bunch. We went on our dates on our own. My parents were, across the ocean, so I didn't have to consult them or
Yeah.
ask for a chaperone. And we got engaged about 3 weeks later.
Wow. And then between the engagement and the wedding is usually just the preparation for the marriage, right? Or the wedding ceremony.
Exactly. The engagement is just to kind of let people know, hey, this is happening. It's not a contract. There is actually a religious engagement and marriage thing. Those are two separate elements, but
Uh-huh.
all of that happens at the time of the wedding. And when you're under the canopy, there's basically the engagement part, which takes a few minutes. Then there's like a break where something else happens, and then you do the wedding part. So we do have that, but
Yeah.
it's instantaneous.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't
That's
have like a big thing in between.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I love that because we can choose to do that as well as have, the signing of the contract, which is the engagement, and then, the wedding all at the same kind of, well, we have 3-day weddings, so all in that same period.
That we don't got.
Yeah. No, I love that. Is there any cultural practices that you guys have for like the wedding ceremony, or is it the same as in the U.S.? I'm assuming
the
you
same.
attended. Yeah.
So a lot of the things that come to Judaism, they're not really regional, except for maybe modern Orthodox Jews kind of participating in different things here than they would in Israel.
Uh-huh.
The kind of things that are done has to do with religion. It's more religion than culture when it
Mhm.
comes to stuff like contracts and
Mhm.
and prayers and things like that.
Yeah.
So whether I would have gotten married in Israel or like I did, I got married in New York, the same kind of ceremony happened.
Mhm.
We did have separate seating at our wedding,
Uh-huh.
which is fairly common in religious communities.
Yeah.
Personally, I didn't care all that much for either way, but a lot of the guests that were coming were more comfortable with that kind of a thing. So we had separate seating, but that's
Yeah.
very common in religious communities. And of course, separate dancing too.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
definitely. We okay.
Yeah.
So our religious weddings are usually they have two separate venues next to each other. The guys go to one, the girls go to one. Obviously, the girls' party is funner than the guys' party, but
Won't argue.
yeah, right. In Palestine, we in my village we have our it's the parties are usually just for the women. The men they attend. There are certain traditions that they have to go through, but it's almost 80%, 90% women that are the ones that are kind of doing the celebration. In America, we've kind of adapted the American style. The only thing is we don't do the walking down the aisle bit. We just go straight to the reception. So and the seating is mostly one side is for the women's side of the family, and then another side is for the men's side of the family, and it's separated by the dance floor. And some mixing can happen, but mostly it's just the women dancing and the men having their own like folkloric dance as well. So and then we do like the cake and all of that, and I think those are things that we adopted from the American culture. And that's also it's become a multicultural thing. So even in Jordan, when we attend weddings, they do the cake, they do the father-daughter dance and all of that, which is something that is not typical in Palestine, but it's interesting kind of to see how it evolves and changes as you go from one country to the next. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is interesting that a lot of those things are more kind of cultural, and you make decisions on how to do those things based on where you are and what's common over there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you want to talk a little bit about maybe the misconceptions, that's a tongue twister, that people might have about Israeli Americans that you want to bring awareness to?
I'm not sure what you mean exactly by Israeli American. Basically, somebody who's Israeli who lives in America.
Yeah.
Um, well, I don't know what misconceptions might there be.
So you've never
Uh,
experienced any kind of like anything like that's not true, that you've been kind of like labeled and you kind of want to bring awareness to. So, okay, maybe that's
well,
not.
so when it comes to things like politics, for example, people have always asked me, you know, or people have accused me also for saying, when you vote, you care about Israel first. And actually, it's not true. There might be some people who do, and that's, there will always be people who are acting on their own way, but it's not a generalization that's correct. And whenever I vote, my main considerations are for what's happening here where I live. I'm an American citizen and I care about this country. So that is a misconception that people have accused me of in the past, but isn't correct at all. And Jason asked about anti-Semitism. So with the exception of, an occasional person driving down by the street and screaming something dumb out the window, and it's usually a young teenager who's just dumb doing it. So that happens from time to time, and it happens to anybody. It happens to girls for just being girls. And if they see, a kippah on my head, they'll yell. So there are stupid teenagers doing that sort of a thing. So I've encountered that. But online, on Instagram, relatively regularly, I have to delete hateful comments that come up. So that happens sometimes. And I just get rid of those. I don't like to address them because I'm not going to fight with people who are just bullies. So that happens here and there. And I just fend it off because there's not much to do about it. It's the internet, and who knows who those people are. So
I commend you for being, so brave and wearing kind of like your religion on your sleeve with your kippah. Did I say it correct? Yeah. One of the things that I struggle with living in America is the fact that religiously I should wear a scarf. I am conservative with my dressing. I try to be humble in the way I act and look and all of that. So everything that comes with wearing the scarf, I kind of embody. The only thing is I don't wear the scarf because I am afraid of being targeted. So I definitely commend you for being, courageous and brave for, representing your religion and knowing that you're going to deal with that. And that's one thing that I want people to know, is that we are all human, and it's not fair to be, criticized for our religion or our, origin and all of that. So thank you for everything kind of like you do and you stand for, because I feel like you're a good representation of a human being. You know what I mean? So
I try to be. I mean, going back to the conversation of wearing your religion in public, there are certainly places, and it's just unfortunate that it's this way, but there are certain places in America that are safer than others for either of us to display our religion. I happen to live in a place that's very accommodating for all religions. So I live in the New York area. If you went in the New York streets with a scarf and I went out with a kippah, nobody would bat an eye.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. But there are certain places where it will be not good for either of us. And I bet that especially right now, there are many more places that will be worse for you than it is for me.
Yeah.
And that's just an unfortunate situation right now. Kippah and yarmulke is the same thing, Jason, to answer your question. But it's very unfortunate that it has to be this way right now. But I sympathize with you not wanting to wear a scarf all the time on the streets, because it's scary.
It is difficult. I mean, I try to teach my children to be accepting of other people's culture, and especially when they see someone who looks different, don't be rude and ask and be so like open, because he's 6 years old, he's just going to blurb out words. But I try to explain, if he does, that we have to respect other people's cultures. And my son goes to an international school, and they are having mother language day on the 21st, and my husband and I had to have the conversation of, do we want him to wear a full Middle Eastern alphabet or a Palestinian alphabet. And I think we really came to the conclusion of maybe instead of a full outfit, maybe just like one thing, because of everything that's going on. And we just have to be, be cautious and protect ourselves. And it's not easy. But going from
Nope.
culture, let's move into how has that influenced your Hebrew lettering and your dimensional type. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. That's a fun story.
Yay.
Professionally, like I mentioned before at the beginning, I am a UX designer. I actually code most of the day.
Mm-hmm.
About a few years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I don't remember exactly when anymore, I decided to start doing something on the side just for creative fulfillment. Because if you're working for somebody all day long, you gotta have some sort of release.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to do typography, but picked Hebrew because I'm terrible at English hand lettering, quite frankly. And I'm very familiar with the Hebrew letter form, and I decided to just run with it because it's something that I knew to do, and I just started doing that. So I started posting those things on Instagram, and I was very fulfilled. It was very exciting, and of course, started getting great feedback from people. And when I started, there were a few interesting things. First of all, I didn't know that there was anybody else in the world who cared about non-English lettering, who cared about the Hebrew letter form. I didn't know it was a thing. Also, I didn't know at all about dimensional type. Was not at all familiar with it. I just started the project to do something. And then came a time during Passover where there are certain restrictions that we have, for example, not using ink, not writing with pens. And when that came about, it was a few months into me doing my lettering. And I was very frustrated because I wanted to continue doing this thing that I fell in love with and I was doing almost daily, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
So I decided to instead not use ink, because that's what the restriction is on, and use food that I had laying around. And that was the first time that I did dimensional type. And before I posted it, I looked around and I was like, I wonder if people are doing food typography. And I discovered Danielle Evans, who is the queen of food typography. I was like, oh, wow, my thing is so embarrassingly horrible.
Yeah.
And I was embarrassed to post it, but I did anyways. And I commented to her saying, wow, I love your stuff. And she was so kind. She posted my thing saying, hey, look at this other use of dimensional type in another language. And from that moment, it started growing. I love doing lettering out of non-ink and pencil, out of actual items. And that's most of what I do nowadays is what you would call dimensional type. Also, along the way, when I started, like I said, I didn't know anybody had been interested in this. But of course, there are plenty of people who are interested in all these sort of, if you find any niche of nerdy thing, you will find people who are interested in it. Right? Yes. And I found all those people, and I now have never met in person, but have a large amount of friends that I met online who are interested in Hebrew typography. And there's so many amazing hand letterers and Hebrew and type designers. And I basically decided to create a new inspiration account. I have an Instagram account called Hebrew Type, where I feature all these other people because I don't want it to be hard for everybody to discover like it was for me. So if somebody is looking for, Hebrew typography, if they want to figure out if it's a thing, it's definitely a thing.
I love that you created a community around something that you kind of like did out of love, which is awesome. And also it was very challenging to create Hebrew lettering, correct? Because of the letter forms don't really sit with each other, right? And
that is correct. English has what you all know as script letters. Yes. They connect, they're made to connect, they're meant for people to be lazy and not have to pick up their pen. That's, I think, why it was originally done. So there's a way to do that in English, and we all know that. And so very commonly, when people are doing hand lettering, you'll see that style being used because you can do swashes with them and you can do a lot of pretty things. In Hebrew, that's not a thing. And not only is it not a thing, it is really hard to connect letters without making them look like different ones. For example, there are 3 letters that are just a stick, but they're different lengths. One of them is a short one of them is a medium one, and then one of them is like a super long one. And so if you were to connect that letter, you could never do it from the bottom. You could sometimes do it from the top. And there are certain letters that if you kind of create a swatch with it, it will look like a different letter.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of letters that just cannot be touched and have extensions added to. So there is no script in Hebrew, and it's really difficult to find the places where connections were allowed. And I saw that as a challenge. And I was like, you know what? This is something that's really hard to pull off. I'm going to try to do this as much as possible. So if you come across my work and you see the stuff that I'm doing, you will find a lot of connections, even simple ones, just kind of like having a curve connecting the two letters. And I do that all the time whenever I can, just to prove the point that it's possible. And it's very satisfying.
The best designs come from the restrictions like that. So, it's kind of genius that you can figure out certain ways to connect letters that are not meant to connect with each other. And I'm just curious, is the poster behind you the Hebrew alphabet?
So there are two actually sets of posters of Hebrew alphabet. I did both of them. The one on that side, right over here, is made out of food. And each letter is made out of a food that begins with that letter. And it was done for a type foundry called Aleph, Aleph, Aleph. Aleph is the first name of the alphabet. And I think in Arabic it's pretty similar also, right?
It's Aleph, yeah.
So we've got Aleph. This one is a more abstract one, and it's made out of colorful clay. So I did two alphabets over here that are hanging behind me.
Really cool. I'm very familiar with the food alphabet, their shapes, but the abstract one I would have never guessed. Yeah, that's really cool. I love that you have taken a challenge, made it your own, and not only just made it your own, kind of like expanded and took it into a different medium. And I know that you and Danielle right now are kind of like collaborating on something. Do you want to touch a little bit on that? Because I know it is a project still in the working, but let's put the seed in everyone's mind.
I think this is the right opportunity to do that. I haven't really talked about this publicly before because it is, like you said, still in the planning. But for some time now, Danielle and I have decided to try to start something that would help people empathize better, help people understand other people better. And the reason why we came to this is because we realized that a lot of conflict, whether it be Israel-Palestinian conflict, local conflict, just fighting with a coworker, conflict often comes from not understanding the other people, from being indifferent to their problems. And being indifferent has to do with just not understanding them and knowing where they're coming from. And to that end, we are currently putting together this project that's called I Was Indifferent. And the purpose of it, or the tagline rather, if you will, is to take a short walk in somebody else's shoes. And what we're going to do with this is have certain interviews of people with certain backgrounds and life experiences, sharing their story, and perhaps other people also digging into that and building upon it in some way. So that's the basic abstract idea of what we're working with. It's not ready yet, but I would love if anybody who wanted to participate in any level, whether it be tell their story, looking at you, Hiba, and or just learn about other people, because that's the point, just understand other people. We have a placeholder website called iwasindifferent.to. So if you go to iwasindifferent.to, you can follow any social channels that we have that are open but not active yet, or sign up to the email list that's also not active. And I really hope that something beautiful and positive is going to come from that.
Yeah, definitely. Your project aligns parallel with what I'm trying to do with By Design, is basically build kind of empathy with learning about people's stories and learning about their background and their culture and finding our similarities. And I want to help you kind of like embrace yourself and empower you by telling your story and feeling comfortable and safe and in a positive environment to be able to kind of speak freely. Like I really want to get to know you, and I really did get to know you in the span of the last few weeks.
Almost a year now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I really got to know you in the last few weeks. What's wrong with me?
But
yeah, I know. And I got to know you virtually and your work really well in the last year. And to be honest, if we didn't talk about what we have in common and just pinpointed the few things that were different, or at least been interested to know what differences we have, I don't think we would have this good friendship that you and I have, you know. I respect everything that
Yeah.
you embody. I very much respect the fact that you have faith, and that you know, that you're a good person deep down in your heart. And we have very similar values when it comes to raising our children, and kind of raising them to become good human beings, which is something I feel like is very important. So,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
like, I want to just take it back for a second to
yeah,
when we first met, right? And I came to you and said, "Hi, I'm Israeli," and you said, "Hi, I'm Palestinian," and then we talked,
uh-huh,
right?
yeah,
That that is amazing. The fact that we just said, "Oh, hey, we know that our communities have problems with one another,
yeah,
but we shouldn't have
definitely.
problems with one another." And I think that I just want to go back to my own story where I grew up in a way that I didn't understand anything, and I, through help with outside influence from my uncle, I kind
Mhm.
of learned to become a person and see the goodness in other people, and to understand that everybody's just human.
Yeah.
And what it took is basically I had to rise above all those things that I grew up with and decide on my own to be more understanding. And
Yeah.
so, if there's basically one takeaway that anybody wants to have from our conversation right now,
Mm-hmm.
is first of all, talk.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't talk, you're not going to understand the other
Yes.
people. And also, like, if you believe in the inherent goodness that everybody has, then surround yourself with better people
Mm-hmm.
and make those people be just better people. Doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter
Yeah.
what background they're from, right? And
Yeah.
if you think you can also have an influence back on where you came from, or change any certain biases in your smaller circle of people who might still have those, then once you start growing and you learn and you understand other people better, go back and educate them.
Definitely. And I also want to bring people's attention that culture is different than religion. Okay. So, culture, the traditions and the people that have maybe in their surroundings, and the things that they do is completely different than religion. And as we can see, the religion at its core, both being a Muslim and being a Jew, right? I said that correctly, right? Yes.
Yes.
They are really good in the core. The bases are really good. So, I just wanted to bring attention to that, because there's a lot of negative things that result out of just culture, and who
Yes.
creates culture? It's people. And people,
Yeah.
if they don't have good intentions, they're going to create bad culture. You know what I mean? So I definitely want to bring attention to that. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is the product that you ended up creating when in your creative journey, Dapper Notes. Can you talk about how that ended up happening, and the story about how you created it, and where can people find
I'll give you a brief history of Dapper Notes.
it?
Um, a few years ago, I was starting a business with a friend that was
Mhm.
mostly t-shirts and prints. And we wanted to create a product on top of that wasn't either of those things, something a little bit more physical. And we ended up deciding to do notebooks, and we kind of figured out a way to make notebooks unique. But our business never really made it anywhere because, we didn't really put our heart into it.
Mhm.
Fast forward a few years, I'm deep into doing Hebrew typography. I've done some dimensional type. I had a whole spicy type series where I wrote the names of spices out of the spices themselves. And I've done a bunch of different things that people started asking me, hey, do you have prints of that I can hang in my house? And so on. I said, you know what? Let me put up a shop. I put up a shop with all those prints, and I sell them to the people who wanted to. And then once everybody who wanted to buy them bought them, I didn't sell too many anymore. I sell
Mhm.
very few of them. And I like the idea of having a shop. I like creating things for people to own. And I remembered that notebook idea that we had. So I decided to go back to it and refine it and come up with a pocket notebook. I create pocket notebooks now that are completely unique and not like anything else that's out there. Because if you go to any stationery store, you'll find dozens upon
Mhm.
dozens upon dozens of notebook brands. Chief among them Field Notes, which I also love and use,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of other kinds. Moleskin, you're familiar with a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there are no luxury notebooks out there. There are
Uh-huh.
no notebooks that are something that's for gift giving. Nothing that you can kind of wear if you go to that restaurant with a suit on, right?
Mm-hmm.
You
Yes.
need to be able to have a fancier notebook, not just your, plain old paper one. So I decided to make notebooks that were fancy, and that consists of having a beautiful fabric cover with a nice color page inside, and some thin tissue as well. And they're hand sewn; they're not stapled,
Mm-hmm.
with nice thick wax thread. And the product in the end, these notebooks that I'm making, they're just pretty and fancy and giftable. And I started making them in small quantities in different styles. And now I call them Dapper Notes, and I sell them online at
Yeah.
dappernotes.com.
What I love about your notebooks is that you took the art of bookbinding and created them, with different materials, and so you have covers that are made out of um, jeans. I think I've seen
Oh, yeah.
and leather,
Yes.
and so they are definitely they feel luxurious. They're not just, they don't just look luxurious. And the paper that you use is a heavier paper as well, and it's easy to kind of like draw your lettering or do your sketches and all that.
Right. I mean,
It's
if you want it to be super fancy, carry your Dapper Notes with a nice fountain pen, because
uh-huh.
they hold up, the paper holds up very nicely. So I'm told. I don't use fountain pens, but I've been told that it holds up very nicely to fountain pens. So you have the ultimate, fanciness
Yeah.
again for that restaurant only.
Well, it's been such a pleasure. Can you just tell everyone where they can find you and how they can follow your journey?
Sure. I mentioned I Was Indifferent, so you can go to iwasindifferent.to to follow along that journey that is not yet live, but will be soon. My personal space of preference to be followed is on Instagram at E_KNOWN. It's Enon. I post my personal work on there. And you can go to dappernotes.com for Dapper Notes, or at Hebrew Type on Instagram to see other people's work for the most part, from around the world who do Hebrew typography if you're interested in that.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Enon, for sharing your story with us today. It's been wonderful learning more about your heritage, traditions, and culture. To learn more about Enon, visit enon.avit.al, so avit.al, and follow him on Dribble, Twitter, and Instagram at E_KNOWN. Please visit hibabydesign.com/2 to watch today's episode, video recording, show notes, and extras. I want to encourage you to listen positively, because when people talk about their culture, it usually involves very intimate aspects of their life. It's an honor to be invited into their safe space, and it becomes your responsibility to protect and uphold the integrity of their stories. I'd love to thank you for joining me, and remember, your normal is weird to people who don't understand you, but your weird is what makes you special. So embrace your weird and spread to others the love and acceptance you want to gain. Until next time, I'm your host, Hiba, and you've been listening to By Design.